The first thing you learn in deep space cargo is that silence is a language, and right now the silence from the command deck was screaming. It was a heavy, dead air silence that filled the cockpit of the Grendel's Maw, a sound that had nothing to do with the vacuum outside, and everything to do with the 5 words that had just burned themselves onto the main comm screen. Cargo Bay 7. Official quarantine, do not inspect. A direct order from the Viridian Colonial Authority, stamped with the kind of unbreakable cold digital authority that was usually reserved for planetary plagues or weapons of mass dissolution. Kalen Voss, a cargo pilot with 15 years of hauling other people's secrets across the black, stared at the order and felt the first cold prickle of unease slither down his spine. The manifest, a thin, sanitized digital ghost of a document, listed the cargo as reclamation materials, void sealed. But the VCA didn't use quarantine stamps for scrap. They used them for things they were afraid of. And right now, they were telling him the thing he was paid to protect, the core of his contract, was a sealed box of nightmares he wasn't supposed to look inside. The portmaster, a skeletal man with eyes the color of weak tea, had been the one to deliver the order in person, his synth leather boots making no sound on the Maw's grated catwalk. He'd handed over the data slate with a tremor in his thin fingers, a tremor that had nothing to do with the ship's life support. The colonists were already gone, Voss, he'd said, his voice a dry rasp that seemed to be trying to convince himself more than anyone else. A complete extraction. There's nothing left in those pods but environmental residue. The containment is strictly a precaution. He'd gestured vaguely toward the ship's belly, where Cargo Bay 7 was a sealed black maw of potential horror. Biofilter scrubbing, standard procedure for a dead colony. He'd called it a dead colony. The words hung in the recycled air, thick and heavy like mourning. Kalen had only nodded, the professional mask of the disinterested hauler firmly in place, but his mind was already screaming, "You don't quarantine a ghost, you quarantine a body, you quarantine a secret." Deep space was never really silent to Kalen. There was always the hum, the vibration, the mechanical breathing of a ship pretending to be alive. But this time, something underneath it felt wrong. Not loud, not obvious, just slightly out of place, like a note in a song that didn't belong there. He found himself noticing it more than he wanted to. That was the part that bothered him. The fact that his mind refused to stop paying attention to something he couldn't even prove was real. They were heavy, life support heavy, the kind of mass that came from systems that kept things alive, not from inert scrap. A week into the jump, the ship's diagnostic AI, a snide, disembodied voice he'd named Nuisance, started flagging irregularities. Low-level energy spikes from the cargo bay, the kind that mimicked the rhythmic pulse of organic matter. Life support monitoring was showing a faint, anomalous CO2 output from the supposedly inert, environmentally sealed pods. A ghost in the machine, Nuisance called it. Kalen called it a scream. Kalen stopped checking the logs after a while. Not because the readings improved, they didn't. They stayed wrong. Always the same kind of wrong. And that was worse than random failure. Because random failure is normal in space. But this felt consistent, like something was keeping the error alive on purpose. Kalen stood in front of Cargo Bay 7 longer than he should have. The access panel blinked softly, waiting for a command he wasn't fully sure he wanted to give. His hand hovered near the override key, but for a moment he didn't move at all. It wasn't fear that stopped him. It was something worse, certainty. Because once that door opened, there would be no just cargo anymore. No more excuses, no more pretending he didn't notice the weight shifts, the strange readings, the things the system kept calling noise. He pressed the override. The door didn't open immediately. It hesitated first, like even the ship didn't want to obey. Then hydraulics engaged, slow and heavy, like something waking up after a long sleep. A wave of air came out first, warm, unfamiliar, not mechanical, not sterile. Kalen instinctively stepped back, but stopped himself halfway. "What the hell?" he whispered, not finishing the sentence. The bay lights didn't turn on fully. They dimmed instead, as if the system had switched to a different mode on its own. Rows of pods stretched into the darkness. Not crates, not cargo containers. Something else. Something organic in shape, like they had been designed around life instead of storage. And inside them, movement. Its eyelids, thin and translucent like a dragonfly's wing, fluttered. The warning chime intensified, a desperate, repeating song. This wasn't a quarantine. This was a distress signal. This was a cry for help that had been waiting for a listener. He was the only one who had bothered to listen. He staggered back, his mind reeling. He had to report this. His hand instinctively went to his comms unit on his wrist, but as his fingers brushed the cold metal, the portmaster's face flashed before his eyes, the tremor in his hand, the practiced hollow words. They were already gone. The man hadn't been lying to Kalen. He had been lying to himself. He was part of a system, a monstrous bureaucracy that made inconvenient truths disappear. If Kalen reported this, what would happen? The VCA would issue a new order, a secure order with a military escort. They wouldn't want witnesses. They wouldn't want a cargo pilot with a conscience. They might try to silence him. He would be a loose end, and a very inconvenient one at that. The child's eyes snapped open. They were not the eyes of a sleeping thing. They were wide, intelligent, and filled with an abject terror that cut through the sterile air of the cargo bay like a blade. It stared at him, not with the vacant animal panic of a captured beast, but with the clear, profound horror of a sentient being who understood its own predicament. It was a child who knew it had been stolen. Its mouth opened, and a soft, warbling sound came out, a sound that was trying to form into something, a sound of desperate, plaintive communication. It was trying to speak. It was trying to ask him why. Kalen's training, his professionalism, his contract, the money, the future he had planned, it all shattered in that single, terrified gaze. He was no longer a cargo pilot. He was a witness, and a witness, he now understood, had a choice to make. He could close the door, purge the logs, and pretend he'd never seen anything, continuing on his path to a complicit, blood-stained retirement. Or he could open the pod. He could do the one thing he was absolutely, unquestionably forbidden from doing. He was a human pilot, bound by human contracts, human laws, and a human system that had just been exposed as a fraud. The eyes of the alien child didn't plead in the language of laws or contracts. They pleaded in the universal language of fear. He moved before he could think, his hand reaching for the manual release on the side of the pod. It was a heavy lever, clearly designed to be used only in an emergency. His fingers closed around it, the cold metal a shocking contrast to his burning skin. The child inside watched him, its alien face a canvas of emotions he could still read, fear, confusion, and a dawning, fragile hope. He pulled the lever. The mechanism hissed, and the milky membrane began to dissolve, turning from a solid barrier into a viscous, clear liquid that dripped away like melting ice. The sterile antiseptic smell was overwhelmed by the sweet, floral scent, now mixed with something else, a sharp, coppery smell of fear, and the tang of a foreign biology. The pod opened, and the young alien, tumbled forward into his arms. It was lighter than he expected, its body a fragile collection of avian bones and cool, smooth skin. It was wearing a simple grey garment that looked like a thin spacesuit. The moment it touched him, it flinched, a full-body shudder of pure instinct. Kalen held his breath, terrified he'd hurt it. Its large, dark eyes, like polished obsidian, were locked onto his. It was trembling, its fear so palpable he could feel it in his own bones. He slowly, carefully lowered himself to the deck plates, cradling the child in his lap, hoping the act of sitting, of making himself smaller, would be seen as non-threatening. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper that felt entirely inadequate. He knew it couldn't understand his words, but maybe, just maybe, it could understand his tone. The young alien stared at him, its trembling beginning to subside. It slowly raised a long, slender hand with 3 fingers and touched his face, a gesture so tentative, so exploratory, it broke something inside him. He saw its own face and saw something other than fear. He saw a question, just as he knew it would see a question in his own eyes. Why? Why was I here? The silence of the ship was gone, replaced by a frantic chorus. The melodic warning chimes from the other pods were now a desperate, overlapping symphony. The child in his arms let out a soft, plaintive cry, a wordless response to the chorus of its kin, and Kalen knew he was in the middle of something vast and terrible. He was in a nursery of stolen children, and the alarm had been sounded. He had to figure out where to take them. He couldn't go back to VCA space. He couldn't deliver them. He had to run. He had to find a place where they would be safe, a place where the truth could be told. He looked down at the creature in his arms, its life so fragile and precious in the palm of his hands. But the bigger questions were now screaming in his mind, louder than the alien alarm. Who had sanctioned this? The VCA? The military? A rogue corporation? And why? What was so valuable about these children that an entire human authority would lie, cheat, and steal to get them? Was it biological, strategic? Something else entirely? The answer was a terrifying unknown, but as he looked at the child, he understood one thing with absolute clarity. He was now the protector of this truth, and he was going to find it no matter the cost. He had opened the ship, and in doing so, he had opened a Pandora's box of horrors. He just hoped he could find the hope at the bottom before the VCA came to collect their lost property, and they would come. The ship's comms crackled, a burst of static that resolved into a distorted, heavily encoded military hailing frequency. They had found him. The clock was ticking. He scrambled to his feet, the child clinging to him with surprising strength for its fragile frame. His heart hammered against his ribs as the military hailing frequency filled the cockpit with a harsh, demanding tone. He didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was a frantic whirl, trying to formulate a plan. The star charts, the emergency protocols, the law, none of it applied to this situation. He was a man alone, with 37 alien children and a military force closing in. The child in his arms was growing calmer, though its large eyes remained fixed on his face, watching his every expression, absorbing his fear. He felt a surge of protectiveness, so fierce it shocked him. This was no longer a cargo. This was a responsibility. Nuisance, the ship's AI finally piped up, its usual snide tone replaced with a clipped professional urgency. Captain Voss, I am detecting an incoming vessel on an intercept trajectory. VCA ID codes. They are demanding you heave to and prepare for boarding. They are not asking, they are demanding. The AI paused as if processing a new data stream. They are claiming you are in possession of classified high-risk biological material. My analysis suggests a military-grade frigate, the VCA Dauntless. Recommend full compliance. Kalen didn't reply. He just stared at the tactical display, watching the icon of the frigate, a predator painted in red, slowly grow larger on the screen. There was no way to outrun a military frigate, not in a cargo hauler. His mind, a muscle he'd trained to deal with logistical nightmares, was now screaming at him to find a solution. The child, sensing his distress, nuzzled its cool forehead against his jaw, a gesture of comfort that nearly undid him. It knew he was scared, and it was trying to make him feel better. The unfairness of it all, the sheer gut-wrenching injustice, was a physical pain in his chest. Estimated time to intercept 15 minutes, Nuisance announced, its voice a grim digital metronome. They are broadcasting a cease and desist order. They are locking weapons. I would suggest you power down the engines, Captain. There is no other option. But there was always another option. It just wasn't one the AI could process. It wasn't in the manual. Kalen looked at the tactical display, then at the child in his arms, then at the row of sealed pods. The VCA would board the ship, take the children, and make him disappear. The truth would vanish with him, unless he could make sure it didn't. He had the standard data recorder, the one that logged everything for the authority. But he'd need more. He needed an emergency broadcast, something that couldn't be easily silenced. He remembered the spare comms array in the engineering bay, a powerful jury-rigged unit he'd installed for hauling in particularly deep space areas. It was off the official grid. He could set it to broadcast on a broad spectrum, an automated loop. He didn't have a message, not yet. He only had a question that the universe needed to start asking. Why are there alien children in my cargo bay? He would bury the question in the static, a digital whisper. It was a thin hope, a fragile gamble, but it was all he had. He used the remaining minutes before the frigate's arrival to work feverishly. He placed the child back into its pod, but left the membrane deactivated just in case. He couldn't risk it being harmed in what was about to happen. Then, he set to work on the engineering array, his hands a blur of motion. The child watched him from its pod, its gaze no longer fearful, but resolute. It seemed to understand that the strange, two-legged creature was trying to help. "Captain," Nuisance warned, its voice now tinged with something that might have been concern. "They are within weapons range and have initiated a targeting sequence. Power down the engines now." Kalen slammed the final connection into place. The engineering bay hummed with a power it wasn't designed for. A single encrypted data packet was loaded, the coordinates of his current location, a timestamp, and a single question. VCA cargo manifest, reclamation materials. Reality, 37 living beings. Why? The message was set to broadcast on a continuous, low-power loop, disguised as telemetry data. It was a scream into the void. It was all he could do. He stepped back, his chest heaving, his hands stained with grease and fear. The Dauntless filled the Moore's main view screen, a dark and brutal wedge of military efficiency. A voice, cold and official, echoed from the cockpit speakers, demanding his immediate surrender. Kalen didn't answer. He just sat down in his pilot's chair, the child's eyes still on him from the open pod. He had opened the ship. He had seen the truth. And now, he had to survive long enough to tell the story. The first boarding party would be here soon, their boots thudding against the sealed airlock. He had bought himself a few minutes. He had bought the universe a whisper. He only hoped it was enough. The sound of the boarding party's magnetic clamps latching onto the Grendel's Moore's hull was a sound that traveled through the entire ship, a hard, metallic thump that felt like a jail cell door slamming shut. Kalen could feel the vibration through the deck plates in his very bones, the unmistakable feel of being caught. He took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing the wild panic in his chest into a cold, hard knot of resolve. The first contact was going to be critical. He couldn't seem scared, he couldn't seem guilty. He had to be exactly what he was supposed to be, a disgruntled, bewildered cargo pilot who had no idea what was going on. The airlock snapped open. Boots hit metal before the warning system even finished reacting. 4 Marines entered fast. No hesitation, no announcement. "Pilot Voss," one voice started. "Don't move." Another cut him off immediately. No greeting, no process, just control taking over the room. The leader didn't look at Kalen for long. Her helmet tilted once, scanning everything except him. "Cargo bay," she said flatly. One Marine was already moving before she finished the sentence, pointing 2 of her Marines toward the interior of the ship. "Secure the cargo bay." The tension in the cockpit was a palpable entity. The 2 remaining Marines had their rifles trained on Kalen with the kind of mechanical disinterest that was more terrifying than outright hostility. He was no longer a person to them. He was an object to be controlled. He could hear the heavy, muffled footsteps of the other 2 Marines echoing down the corridor, heading toward the heart of the ship, toward Bay 7. He waited. He could feel his pulse in his throat. He could hear the faint melodic hum from the open pod, a sound he hoped was too faint for the Marine's senses to pick up. A few minutes passed. The silence was excruciating. Then a voice crackled over the lieutenant's comms, distorted by the ship's metal. "Lieutenant, we have a situation in Bay 7. You're going to want to see this." The lieutenant's demeanor shifted instantly. The professional disinterest was gone, replaced by a sharp, predatory focus. "Stay put," she snapped at Kalen, her gaze accusing. Then she was gone, striding down the corridor, her 2 Marines forming a protective triangle around her. Kalen let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He had to move. He couldn't wait for them to come back. He slid out of his chair, ignoring the protesting ache in his joints, and crept to the cockpit door. He could see the lieutenant's team at the entrance to the cargo bay, their backs to him. One of the Marines was pointing frantically at the open pod, at the empty space where the child had been. He had moved it just in time. The pod was now empty, its interior dark and inert. "What the hell is this?" The lieutenant's voice echoed down the corridor, a mixture of anger and bewilderment. There was supposed to be a full bay. Where are the specimens?" Her voice was sharp, demanding an answer that no one could give. She was looking at the other pods, her gaze sweeping across the dormant rows of alien children. They were all still there, sealed and silent, all except the one he had released. He couldn't stay. He needed to get to the ship's lower decks, to a hidden compartment he'd outfitted years ago for a different, less legal purpose. He slid out of the cockpit, his movements as silent as a ghost, and began to navigate the ship's labyrinthine maintenance corridors. He was a shadow in the dim light, a whisper in the humming silence. He had to get the child, the one he'd released, to safety. He had to hide it. The VCA had officially declared the cargo a quarantine violation, but the lieutenant's words had confirmed his worst fear. They were looking for specimens. They weren't just transporting them, they were collecting them. He found the child huddled in the galley, its small form trembling against the base of the food dispenser. It looked up at him, its large, dark eyes blinking slowly in the dim light. It didn't look afraid. It looked relieved. It trusted him. Kalen scooped it up, its cool, light body fitting perfectly in the crook of his arm. The sweet, floral scent of it filled his nostrils, a smell that was now associated not with a meadow, but with a profound, aching compassion. He carried it down a cramped ladder to the ship's underbelly, to a small sealed compartment he'd disguised as an auxiliary fuel tank. It was tight, but it was safe. He gently lowered the child onto a bed of thermal blankets. The child looked around, its gaze taking in the confined space. It made a soft, trilling sound, a sound that Kalen was beginning to recognize as a form of contentment. It felt safe. He was about to close the hatch, to seal the child in its hiding place, when the child reached out and placed its cool hand on his face again. It was a gesture of gratitude, of trust. It was a silent promise. Kalen felt a lump form in his throat. He was a cargo pilot, a cynic, a man who believed in contracts and cold, hard credits. But in this moment, he was something else entirely. He was a protector. He was a father. He closed the hatch, the seal hissing softly as it locked into place. The child was safe, for now. He climbed back up the ladder, his heart hammering. The sound of voices was growing louder. They were coming back. He made it back to the cockpit, just as the lieutenant stormed in, her face a mask of barely contained fury. "One of them is missing, Voss," she spat, jabbing a finger at him. "One of the specimens is missing, and you're going to tell me where it is, or I will have you spaced." Kalen stared back at her, his face a perfect picture of confusion. "Specimens?" he repeated, his voice laced with practiced bewilderment. "I don't know what you're talking about. I was just hauling scrap. You're telling me my ship is full of life?" The lie hung in the air, a fragile, desperate shield. The lieutenant glared at him, her eyes full of suspicion. "Search the ship again," she ordered her team, her voice tight. "Find the specimen. Find out how it got out, and find out what else this damn pilot is hiding." Kalen knew it was only a matter of time. They would tear the ship apart looking for the child. They would eventually find the compartment. He had to change the game. He had to give the child a chance. He had to make the truth bigger than one stolen alien. He had to make it impossible to hide. He looked at the lieutenant, a new kind of defiance flickering in his gaze. He was done playing the innocent hauler. "The child is gone, you're right," he said, his voice low, steady, and full of cold fire. "And I'm not going to tell you where it is. You want to know what's in that bay. You want to know what you're really transporting. Those aren't specimens. Those are people. They're children. And you are all complicit in something monstrous." The lieutenant's hand twitched toward her sidearm, her face hardening. "You're a cargo pilot, Voss. You're nothing. You're a loose end. And right now, you're making yourself a very big one." "Maybe," Kalen said, a dangerous smile playing on his lips. "But I already broadcast the truth." He nodded toward the engineering bay. "The civilian news feeds, the free media. They're all getting it right now. The VCA's secret cargo, the alien children, the stolen lives. It's out there. It's already too late." It was a gamble, a desperate bluff. The broadcast had been a whisper, a single encrypted packet. There was no guarantee it had been picked up by anyone. But he had to make the lie feel real. He had to make them believe the truth was already public. The lieutenant went pale. She stared at him, her face a mask of barely contained rage. "You're lying," she said, though her voice wavered. "You're bluffing." "I'm a cargo pilot," Kalen repeated, spreading his hands. "We're not known for our bravery, but we're known for our redundancy. I have backups, and now so does the truth." The comms crackled again, a new voice, urgent and panicked, breaking in. "Lieutenant, we are receiving multiple civilian hails. The public channels are... They're talking about us. They're asking why a VCA frigate is detaining a cargo ship in neutral space. They're asking about alien children." The lieutenant's eyes widened. The world had just tilted on its axis. The lie had been exposed. The truth was out there, a whisper that was growing into a roar. She stared at Kalen, her gaze full of hatred and a dawning, growing fear. "This isn't over, Voss," she snarled, her voice a low growl. "You're not getting away with this. They'll come for you. They'll come for the child. They'll come for everyone who knows." She turned and stalked off the bridge, her marines falling in behind her. The ship's comms were alive with frantic chatter, voices demanding explanations, voices calling for justice. The military frigate, the Dauntless, began to move, its engines flaring as it broke away from the Grendel's maw. It was retreating, its tail between its legs. Kalen watched it go, his heart still pounding. He had won a battle. He had bought the child a few more hours. But the war was just beginning. He was a wanted man, the pilot who had exposed a conspiracy. The VCA would not forget. They would not forgive. They would send others more ruthless, more determined. The child was still on his ship, still hidden, still the key to a secret that could shake the foundations of human civilization. He had to get it to a place where it would be safe. He had to find a place where the truth could be told. But as he watched the Dauntless disappear into the black, he knew he was no longer a simple cargo pilot. He was a revolutionary, he was a fugitive, and he was the only hope for 37 alien children. The silence of the ship had been shattered, replaced by the frantic, hopeful noise of a universe awakening to a terrible truth. The story of the cargo pilot who opened the ship was just beginning, and it was a story the universe would not be able to ignore.